Hey everybody, it's Cheryl here for Jason's Joy video 2. I noticed that a couple of people did share my video, so whoever did that, I really truly appreciate it. Um, I had to rewatch it to try and fine tune some of the stuff that I'm doing, and what I notice is I don't look up at the camera enough. I kind of look down a lot, and I kind of looking silly. So I apologize again. I'm new to these things, and once again to my oldest art, don't tease me. Anyway, after rewatching video 1, I noticed that I left off when Jason was still quite a young boy. I did mention about his ADD and Asperger's and some of the trials and tribulations we went through when it came to that. And that his father and I had gotten a divorce. What I didn't mention was that we had some interesting things happen before the divorce. Um, his father and I had been together for 14 years, but we had only been married for one. And that was mostly because of family differences, honestly. And there was a rift between my ex-husband and my mother. There was a lot of friction there, even though my mother had given us basically a place to live, had given him a job as a maintenance man in an apartment complex and a place to live when my oldest was born. So there was a lot of disregard for the help that my family provided, even though we were not a wealthy family, and neither was his. But there was no thank you or anything like that. Um, and eventually it was his mother that actually got me my job at the senior home. So we're not going to get into all that because this is about Jason, but there's a lot of crazy family stuff going on. But we only had the house that I mentioned in the last video for a year and I was the one that pushed for it because I felt, well, we were married, we had 2 kids. The last thing we needed was an actual tangible house of our own, especially since New York, the rent was becoming just as expensive as any mortgage payment would be. So it made sense to me to get a house of our own, and pay on a mortgage, an actual asset, than just throwing money at some rental company. But we only lasted in that house for a year. The reason why, and you may think I'm crazy, you may never watch another one of these videos, but the house was highly haunted. We had a lot of experiences in that house, and experiences like me being thrown down the stairs. My oldest would hear people talking, things like that. But Jason was actually highly affected by this house. And as I said in the last video about him being, his attention deficit disorder made it hard for him to pay attention normally. So his idea of what was happening to him, he couldn't quite grasp it. It was very frightening for him. The house had been built in like 1920. It was right diagonally across from a very large graveyard, but it was what we could afford. And it was in decent shape. It had some things that had to be done in the inside of the house. The outside was new siding, new roof, very good condition. So being haunted was the last thing that would have crossed our minds, but it was extremely haunted. And so as a novelist, this is another story I started writing before Jason got sick, and I do intend at some point to complete it because things that happened in that house were insane. And the prologue actually begins about Jason crying out from his bed, wanting nothing to do with any of his stuffed animals. Now, mind you, he was like 6 years old in this house. And at 6 years old, he didn't want anything to do with any of his stuffed animals. He also didn't want anything to do with any humanoid looking toys, anything that had a face. So I would go in his room, he'd be so distraught, and all of these things would be turned around to face the wall. And I said to him, I said, why? Why do you keep turning your toys around? And at 6 years old, he used the word grimacing. He said that they make grimacing faces at him, which shocked me. And I said, you're just being silly. No, nothing's making grimacing faces at you. But he insisted they were making grimacing faces at him. And when he followed that up with that there were black shadowy things coming out of the attic, I had to take him pretty seriously at that point. Something was seriously happening to him, and he was fearful. He would end up sleeping in mine and his dad's bed. It was not a good experience for him at all, to where he talked about that, or should I say he never wanted to talk about that right up to adulthood. He didn't like it. It scared him. He didn't like it at all. But he did get curious about what we called ghosties, because we would watch Ghost Adventures, and that would help him understand what happened to him in that house. So anyway, I digress. That was part of the reason why we only stayed in that house for a year. The other part is that the stress and the negativity that happened from the time we moved into that house to the time that I left led up to the divorce from their father. And he practically kicked me out of the house, and I had really no place to go. But luckily, I had found someone else that was going through a divorce of their own, and through a mutual friend. And he took me in, and we eventually decided to take the kids in, and we went from there. So it led to a more stable environment, which is why from the last video, Jason ended up in a new grade school, the one that figured out that there was something going on with him with the Asperger's, ADD, and that kind of thing. But all this stress and all this bullying and everything else made it very difficult for someone like Jason to get along well in school and struggle with his grades and stuff like that. The teachers were ill-equipped to really handle someone like Jason. I had actually created a daily log, almost like a diary, to communicate with his teachers, because they wouldn't call me if there was a problem. I'd find out after the fact and stuff like that. And I would say to them, how do you want me to address this with him when I'm finding 2-3 days later what happened? He's going to forget. It's not going to register. So I had created a daily diary, basically. And all I asked for was, if there was a problem, to write it down so that I can address it with Jason that day. And then I would respond with how I addressed it with him and return it to the teacher. And believe it or not, it worked out really well, because kids, when they do something wrong, you can't wait to address it with them. You have to address it with them right away. You have to say, what you did today was a problem, and this is why, and when you have a kid like Jason, I've seen videos of parents like taking stuff away from their kids who have ADD, ADHD, or on the autism spectrum, and all that does is make them blow up. You're taking away something from them. They already feel like they don't understand this world. They already feel like they can't fit in, and now you're taking away their crutch, basically. It's what keeps them going. And then you wonder why there's tantrums and throwdowns and blow ups. And you can't do that with these kids. And I'm not saying that I hate the word punishment. I'm not saying that some kind of reaction, or I don't even know the word I'm looking for, um, isn't isn't necessary. Um, but to just yank stuff away from them, just to me, is not the answer. And it never worked with Jason. And Jason ended up being a wonderful, amazing adult. So, I think that letting them know what they did was wrong or created a negative effect and why, you have to kind of like really get through to them. Um, and it's okay to say, I was thinking about taking your PlayStation away, but I'm not going to do that to you because I believe you can correct your behavior. You know, that kind of reinforcement, works better. At least it did in Jason's case. So anyway, after all that happened in that house, and Jason found this new school, and we developed this way of interacting with the teachers and finding a correct way to deal with his behaviors. Things started to get better. They started to get better. We fixed the vision problem. I got him some glasses, and it was funny because we had to put one of those the holders that you can have it tight to your head, because they would always fall off his face. So I had to get him one of those. Like, I think fishermen wear those, hunters maybe, and um, I had to get him one of those so that it wouldn't fall off his face all the time. Um, and he started to thrive. He started to do well in school. He passed each year. Um, and he started to do pretty well. And the more people understood him, the more we followed the IEP and correct things and move forward, he started to do better. Um, at home, I allowed him to be more of himself. If he wanted to go crazy or whatever, I let him, because all day long he had to restrain himself in school. So, make a mess, I'll help you clean it. I just it wasn't worth it to me for me to be constantly at him. um and it's close to my heart, because there's so many kids these days that are depressed and want to harm themselves or others, or want to commit suicide. And sometimes the parents think they're being good and doing the right thing by disciplining and stuff like that. But sometimes, choose your battles. Sometimes they just need to let it out. Um, and in Jason's case, he would come home after restraining himself, because that's what it was. Self discipline. Very hard for these kids. And I would say, okay, he wants to play the PlayStation until he falls asleep, whatever. As long as the homework was done, because I would help him get the homework done. um, and there were times that he would do things that were completely unacceptable. And one of the ways that I would discipline him was, Jason didn't like to handwrite. He had a hard time handwriting. The kids during his time in elementary school were not taught cursive. So he didn't know how to sign or his name or write cursive or anything like that. And he hated his handwriting. He was left-handed. He hated his handwriting. And so one of the things I would do to discipline him if he did something really, truly inappropriate, he had to sit down and write 100 times why that was not okay. I did this and it wasn't okay, or something like that. Oh, he hated it. Absolutely hated it. But it's funny because you think about It was even in The Simpsons where Bart Simpson had to go up to the chalkboard and write 100 times or whatever. Kids have always hated this. And when it came to Jason, that was a severe enough punishment to not do certain things. So just sharing that, I thought that was pretty funny because, um, like I said, first thing that crosses our mind is to take something away or something really negative. Nah, just sit there and write 100 times that you did this and it wasn't okay. you, those behaviors stopped. Um, anyway, so I don't want to carry on too much about that, but things started to change for Jason. We tried to get him interested in other things like fishing, and this house where we're at now is in a secluded mountainous area, and a lot of people go fishing, they go hunting, they do things outdoors. We tried to get him involved in those things. He was not interested. Um, so, we try and push it sometimes? Yeah. Uh, but it just wasn't something that he was interested in. He was more into computers and online things. I mean, even as a young kid, he would play these computer games called Jumpstart, and where basically, if you were in second grade, you would play Jumpstart third grade to help you get into third grade. And he was always doing really well ahead of time. It helped him excel. There's a part of me that wishes those types of games were still available, because it helped him a lot. Helped him a lot. It helped him get moving faster into each grade. Um, and he did. He passed every year with his peers. He never stayed behind. If anything, he was very, very smart. So when it came time for him to graduate high school, uh, you know, he didn't really have any friends. Um, he was bullied right up until that point. I think there was one severe bullying incident on the bus where we actually had to go to that kid's parents' house and address it, and basically say, don't ever put your hands on him again, kind of thing. Um, so Jason hated school. He hated school. He couldn't wait for it to be over. Um, he did have one incident medically at high school where he had a serious asthma attack and ended up being put in an ambulance and sent to the hospital for treatment. Um, that was scary. But he graduated. He graduated on time with his peers. He did a great job. Um, but then the fear of what happens now took over because we said, he would have to either choose to go to college or he could find a job. But he would have to do something to contribute. Um, and he decided to go to college, and he signed up at the community school. And once again, just was doing amazing. There was a support group, and I apologize, I can't remember the name of them right now, but they were a support group to help students with special needs. Because once you're diagnosed with autism or being on the autism spectrum, that's with you for the rest of your life. So the college was aware. I had to submit, the documentation that he had these shortcomings, if you will, and they helped him. They helped him, sign up for classes and help him decide which degree he was going to go towards and that kind of thing. And they did an amazing job, and Jason did an amazing job in college and graduated with honors and part of Phi Theta Kappa. He had the gold ropes around his neck when he graduated, and this mom couldn't have been more proud. With everything that he had gone through and had to endure, he had fought adversity, and he was doing really well. Before he graduated, I want to say in his final year, because instead of 2 years at the community college, it was taking him three, just because of everything that he had to do. In the third year is when COVID came around. I remember him having to wear the mask and stuff like that. Um, so he had cut his credits down, and he had some filler time, and he decided that he would fill his days off from school going to work with me. There was an opening in the dietary department to help serve the residents at the senior home. And he decided he would work with me every other day. So he was at school 2 days a week and he was at work the other 3 days. He didn't want, he just wanted to be with me, I think. And so I got him the job. And shortly after that, the vaccine mandates came in that the New York State Department of Health required all workers in senior care to be vaccinated. My son had never had even a cold or anything before that. He had never had blood drawn. He never had a need to, even with his ambulance ride during high school for his asthma thing, was just a breathing treatment. They didn't take blood. They didn't do any of that stuff. So he had never had any kind of needles or blood drawn or anything as an adult, and he was terrified of it. I did offer for him to reconsider the job. They'd be fine, but at this point, he had actually made friends with the residents. He was very caring and loving to seniors. Absolutely amazing, and they loved him. And, as I mentioned earlier, this is where he would run up and down the halls as an infant. I mean, he practically grew up at the place with me. So he didn't want to leave the job. He took the vaccines with me because I had to take them. And we were being tested with the PCR test, the one that he would call the Egyptian scrambler, a brain scrambler. In the beginning, we'd have to go twice a week for those, and we had to get the vaccines. And yeah, we're getting close to some of the more important things that happened that led to him not being here anymore. But I think I've done a good way of summarizing him as a young man, some of his struggles. When you are a parent of a child on the autism spectrum, you tend to overprotect them. You tend to keep them under your wing a lot because you don't want them. They're already struggling and you don't want them to struggle any harder. So you tend to really. I've been accused of coddling him, and I don't care. I didn't care. I didn't coddle him. He grew up to be a very respectful, intelligent, determined, just an amazing man. And I did my best for a child that was on the spectrum who needed love and protection. So I think I've given a pretty good summary of that. And I apologize. He only just passed away last October, so it's difficult sometimes. So the next Jason's Joy video I do, we'll talk more about when he started working at the senior home, the vaccines, the changes that happened in his demeanor, the problems that resulted in that up to his illness, and we might get to when he actually passed away. So thank you again for those who shared the last video. I don't care if you share this one. I'm at a point in my life that doesn't matter. Um, and I don't know how much more time I'll have to do more videos because I'm probably going to have to go back to work at some point. Things are not great. Anyway, thanks again, and thanks for watching. Bye.